وَإِن كُنتُنَّ تُرِدْنَ اللَّهَ وَرَسُولَهُ وَالدَّارَ الْآخِرَةَ فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ أَعَدَّ لِلْمُحْسِنَاتِ مِنكُنَّ أَجْرًا عَظِيمًا. أما بعد. Dear brothers and sisters, we begin by praising Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We send peace and blessings upon Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam and upon his companions. Majority of us sitting here today are married. Or if we're not, we have parents who are married. And for the people who are married, we're very aware that after the first 4 or 5 months, it doesn't stay the same way as it was when you first got married. Usually after the first 4 or 5 months, that's when the first argument breaks out. That's usually when the first disagreement happens. That's usually when you guys stop talking to each other for the first day. And that's when both the husband and wife, their little bubble comes bursting. It bursts and they tell themselves that, what have I done to deserve this? My marriage is in complete shambles. My marriage is going down the drain. I don't know if we can recover from this. And then the next day, you guys are happy again. It happens. And then the next month, same thing. Another argument, another disagreement. And this is the process of life. And at times we tell ourselves that, if we get into an argument, then that's it, that's the end. Or we equate disagreements, differences, and arguments in marriage to a bad marriage. We say that if we have disagreements, or if we argue with our wives, or that we disagree and we get angry with one another, then our marriage is a bad marriage. We are no longer happily married. In reality, that's the reality of our entire life. Nothing in this life is permanently full of joy and full of happiness. There's ups and downs in every single aspect of our lives. This includes marriage. And part of a healthy marriage, this is very important, part of a healthy marriage are the arguments, are the differences that we have. Right? Part of a healthy marriage is the differences and the arguments we have with one another. Everybody has it. No one can say that I've been married for 40 years or 20 years or whatever it may be, and I've never ever disagreed with my spouse. I've never argued with her or him. I've never gotten angry or upset. It happens to everyone. This is part of a healthy marriage. My job today, or my responsibility, my aim, is to illustrate and to show everyone that it's okay to have disagreements. It's okay when you guys argue. It's alright when husband and wife are upset and frustrated with one another. It's not the end of the world. Why? Because as we know, as Muslims, we consider Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, the Prophet of Allah, to be the best human being ever. Imagine the best human being ever. You would think everything is perfect in this person, in the Prophet's life. Yet when you study his life, you will see that he became frustrated with his wives. His wives at times became frustrated with him. At times they had disagreements. At times they even stopped speaking to one another. And this is mentioned in the Quran. This is mentioned in the life of the Prophet. It's completely normal. But also another important thing that I want to draw everyone's attention to today is our responsibility as husbands towards our wives. So to begin with, just a small reminder. The Prophet, peace be upon him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we know he's the best human being, but at the same time, we have to keep in mind that he's a human being. Just the same way you and I have emotions, we have feelings for our families, for our friends, for our spouses. In the exact same manner, the Prophet ﷺ experienced and had those same feelings for his spouse, for his family, for his children, for his friends, for his close companions. Exact same thing. The same emotions, the same feelings, the same experiences, the same pains that we go through is the same thing he dealt with. He's not different. He was a human being just like you and I. In fact, a man came to the Prophet ﷺ once and he asked him, Man ahabbun nasi ilayk? Who is the most beloved person to you, O Prophet of Allah? Immediately, without any hesitation, he said, Aisha, my wife Aisha. And then the person asked him, what about min al-rijal? What about from the menfolk? Who do you love the most? And he said, Abuha, her father. So the Prophet ﷺ experienced and felt the same sort of emotions and feelings we feel on a daily basis. It's not that the Prophet ﷺ, he was a prophet, so therefore he had no emotions and he was able to distance himself from all the desires of this world. Of course not. He was a prophet. He was a human being, and that's exactly why Allah chose a human being to be a prophet, so that we can relate to him, so that we have no excuse to say that, this person has no feelings. He's void. He doesn't experience what we experience. Right? So the Prophet ﷺ experienced all that. And during that time, you have to understand that during the time of the Prophet ﷺ, things were very different. Some of the things that we see today existed back then, but many of the things that were back then are not prevalent today. One of the things is, back then, if a man had to display any sort of affection, if he had to be kind or show his love for his child, or display his affection for his wife, then that person, that man, would be considered, no longer a man. It wouldn't be masculine. A man back then was a person who was strong, who was mean, who was serious, who didn't display his affection or love for anyone. Why? Because a man doesn't, need anyone. He's not emotionally attached to anyone. But we see the Prophet ﷺ fighting against that and contradicting that sort of, habit, that sort of societal belief. It's okay for a man to express his love, to show his affection for the people he cares about. The Prophet ﷺ, when his child Ibrahim passed away, and Ibrahim was his third son who passed away, and he was just a year old, around that age. It was during, that's when a child begins interacting with the parents. That's when the actual bond between parents and children really develop. At that moment, his son passed away, Ibrahim, and the Prophet was just crying. He was weeping. He was profusely shedding tears. And one of the companions came to him and said, "O Prophet, you've told us that we shouldn't go overboard in expressing our feelings for the people who have passed away. If people see you weeping like this, they're going to get the wrong message." So then the Prophet corrected him and said, "This is not what I told you to stay away from. You can cry as much as you want. That's not a problem. But what I've told you to stay away from is saying things such as, why did God choose to punish me? Why did God choose to take away my loved one? Why not someone else's?" So the Prophet ﷺ was a man that was in line, in touch with his emotions. He wasn't a person who, held in his emotions or felt that it was below him as a man to show his affection and love for his wife, his children. And the previous, the hadith, the incident explains that, illustrates it very well. Immediately when the Prophet ﷺ was asked, whom do you love the most? Without hesitation, he said, Aisha. He didn't care about what the society thought at that time, that, to express your love or affection was unmanly. The Prophet didn't care, because he was here to he was here to set a trend. He was here to set a role model, an example for us. That not only should we not be afraid to express our feelings and affection towards the people we love, but in fact it's our responsibility as husbands, as fathers, to ensure that our wives and our children know that we love them, that we express on a daily basis that we care for them. The Prophet ﷺ, he was just breaking so many societal concepts at that time. Back then, women were considered to be, much lower than men. Women were considered to be commodities. They would treat women as though you could buy and sell them. Women were treated as though when the man passed away, then other people can inherit them. They were treated like commodity. And to seek advice from a woman was the last thing a man should ever do. That was the mentality back then. But the Prophet ﷺ, we see in numerous examples. One famous example, when the Prophet ﷺ had his first encounter with Jibreel, with the Archangel Gabriel, he was terrified. He ran down from the cave into his home, and he went to his wife, Khadija radiallahu anha, and he confided in her. He said, this is what's happening. Because why? He trusted her. He wasn't ashamed to seek advice from her. Another example, during the time when the Prophet ﷺ decided to go for Umrah. We explained the entire incident of Hudaybiyah, how they prepared to go for Umrah and then they were rejected. And everyone, all the companions of the Prophet were very angry that we made so many preparations, we've prepared for many months, and now we get there and now they tell us we can't enter more gold, we want more jewelry, we want more clothes, we want a higher standard of living. And they made this request to the Prophet ﷺ, peace be upon him. And the Prophet ﷺ, at first it was okay, but they began demanding over and over again. They began, requesting it, that we want a higher standard of life. Now understand that the Prophet ﷺ, he was a human being, but he was also a prophet. He had a huge responsibility. His responsibility was to set an example for all of humanity. And his standard of life was very different from our standard of life. His standard of life included that he would abstain from the luxuries of this world. That his standard of life was not as luxurious or not as comfortable as many of us would like to have. In fact, if you ever, if inshallah may Allah give all of us the chance to go for Hajj and Umrah, when you go to Saudi Arabia, you'll see, they have museums, and they have actually they have a concept of the house of the Prophet ﷺ. They have a little building, a model of the house of Rasulullah ﷺ. It's not even a house, it's a room. It's a very small room. Really, it's just a room. You go in there, there's no other rooms, it's just a room. That's all it is. That was the standard of life for the Prophet. So although he loved his wives, he had to make it very clear to them that, listen, my responsibility as a prophet comes before anything else. My responsibility to uphold what is required of a prophet is before everything. And then this is when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed these verses in the Quran. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, O Prophet, tell your wives, إِن كُنتُنَّ تُرِيدْنَ الْحَيَاةَ الدُّنْيَا وَزِينَتَهَا, that if you desire the beauty and the life of this world, then we will give it to you. But on condition that you can no longer be the wife or the wives of the Prophet. And this disturbed the Prophet for a very long time, to the extent that he separated himself from his wives for a month. For one entire month, the Prophet ﷺ slept in the masjid, in the mosque. Right? So disagreements are completely normal. Imagine, for 1 month, the Prophet ﷺ was upset with his wives. He slept in the masjid. And then Allah revealed this ayah, that go and tell your wives that because they're demanding a higher standard of life, tell them that if you want a higher standard of life, no problem, we'll give it to you. But your higher standard of life cannot coincide or coexist with you being the wife of the Prophet. Because the Prophet is an example for all of humanity, and his wives are also an example for all of humanity, all of Muslims. And if you choose, so you have a choice. Allah told the Prophet that you go and give them an ultimatum. Either you choose the luxuries and the comforts of this world, or you choose the Prophet and Allah. And all the wives, after they heard this, they chose the Prophet and Allah. That we are ready to sacrifice the luxuries, the comforts of this world for the love of the Prophet and love of Allah. But my point is to highlight the fact that the Prophet ﷺ was angry at his wives. My point is to highlight that he did not speak to them. He did not sleep with them. He did not, engage with them in any intimacy for over a month. So don't believe that if you just get into an argument with your spouse, with your husband or with your wife, that it's the end of it, or that your marriage is completely broken. No. Part of a healthy marriage includes arguments, disagreements. Sometimes you and your wife will not talk, maybe for many days. But understand that it doesn't mean that just because you got into an argument that the next thing in your mind is, that's it, I'm going to have a divorce. No. Divorces are permitted. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us the right for both men and women to divorce. But it should be the last resort. It should be the last thing that comes up in your mind. In fact, in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, the first thing you should do is seek consultation. Try to resolve the matter. If you can't resolve it between yourselves, then go to someone. Go to an expert who can help you resolve this issue. And I have to mention over here that going to an expert doesn't necessarily mean going to your parents. Because if you go to your relatives, then most of the time your relatives will take your position. It's best if you go to a neutral party, someone who has experience, and they can really handle the situation in a balanced, neutral manner. And then finally, if none of that works, then Allah gives us the permission that you can divorce. But even after you divorce, understand that divorcing one another doesn't mean you now have the license to say whatever you want about that person, or you have the license to treat that person in an ill manner, or to mistreat that person. That's not how it works. Just because you have a divorce, it doesn't mean that now you can say whatever you want about that person. You can go on Facebook and write, this person was so-and-so, I hated this person, here's this picture, whatnot. It doesn't mean any of that. It just means you have disagreements in your life, now, separate. And another issue that, needs to be mentioned over here, that in our communities, we think that, because a woman is divorced, now she's, useless. That shouldn't be the case. Majority of the wives of the Prophet were women who were either divorced or widowed. Only one wife of the Prophet was never married, was never married before. All the other wives of the Prophet were married before. Either their husbands passed away, or either they were divorced. It's a very important example for us, that we make it so difficult for women who are divorced to ever have a normal life again. Not only we make it difficult, but we start saying things like, this person wasn't good enough, that's why this person was divorced. The person is going through a hard time as it is. And then as a community, we make it even much more difficult for them. And that's absolutely incorrect. And things like this need to be spoken about. Another example of the Prophet ﷺ, he once said to his wife Aisha, he said, I know when you're angry at me. And then she says, how do you know? And then she says, and then the Prophet said to her that, when you call me by my name, Muhammad, then I know that you're okay with me. But when you call me the Prophet of Allah, she would use different titles basically. The way she spoke to him when she was angry or frustrated, she would speak differently with him. But this just goes to show that it's absolutely fine for husband and wife to get into arguments. It's not the end of it. It's okay to get into arguments, it's okay to get into fights, but don't go beyond the limits. As Muslims, we know that this is a general principle. This is a hadith of the Prophet. He taught us that if you have some sort of argument or disagreement with not just your wife, but any Muslim, then you have 3 days. You have 3 days of respite. 3 days you can, ignore that person, be angry, whatever. But after 3 days, you have to break the ice. After 3 days, you have to go and speak to that person. And more so for your wife. You know, and take this as a principle, that if you get into an argument with your spouse, don't let it last for more than 24 hours. Don't let it go more than 24 hours. You know, be the one, even if you're wrong, be the one to go and just apologize. And understand that every time you get into an argument, every time you stop speaking, when you guys get back together, the love will be stronger. That's how it is. That's how marriage is. You know, there are numerous examples. When you read through the life of the Prophet, you see so many times when the Prophet was aggravated or frustrated with one of his wives, or when his wives were angry with him. It's absolutely normal. And that's my main point today. That we shouldn't just jump to issuing divorces, or we shouldn't jump to, you know, extreme measures when it comes to disagreements between husband and wife. That is not what Rasulullah ﷺ has taught us. That is not what the Quran has taught us. And in fact, all this is normal. It's absolutely fine. Finally, what I'd like to conclude off with is the advice Rasulullah ﷺ gave to all of us, not only all of us, all of humanity. In his farewell sermon, in the final sermon of the Prophet ﷺ, he left a very strong message. He said, "Amma ba'd, ya ayyuhan nas, ayyuhan nas." Understand that the Prophet is saying, ayyuhan nas, O people, not just addressing Muslims. He's setting an example for all of humanity. He's saying, O people, inna li nisaikum alaykum haqqa, that your women have rights over you. Walakum alayhinna haqq, and you have rights over your women. In other words, as a husband, you have responsibilities and obligations to fulfill for your wife. And as a wife, you have responsibilities and obligations towards your husband. And he says, لَكُمْ أَلَّا يُوَاطِعْنَ فُرُشَهُمْ غَيْرَكُمْ, that your right is that she protects her chastity. وَلَا يَدْخُلْنَ أَحَدًا تَكْرَهُونَهُ بُيُوتَكُمْ إِلَّا بِإِذْنِكُمْ, and your right over her is that in your absence, she does not let anyone enter your house whom you dislike, unless you give her permission. وَلَا يَأْتِينَ بِفَاحِشَةٍ, and it is your right that your wife remains loyal to you and she does not disobey, she does not become disloyal to you. And this works both ways. It doesn't mean that if the Prophet is saying here, the wives have to be loyal to the husband, it doesn't mean the husband can be disloyal to the wife. No, it works both ways. Right? And then the Prophet ﷺ says, فَإِنْ فَعَلْنَ فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ قَدَ أَذِنَ لَكُمْ أَنْ تَعْدُلُوهُنَّ وَتَحْجُرُوهُنَّ فِي الْمَضَاجِعِ. That, and if they, fail to do this, if they fail to protect your household, if they fail to protect your chastity, if they become disloyal to you, then Allah has given you permission, أَن تَعْدُلُوهُنَّ وَتَحْجُرُوهُنَّ فِي الْمَضَاجِعِ, that Allah has given you permission to separate yourselves from them and not have any intimate relations with them, to show them that you're very angry with them. And then over here, وَتَضْرِبُوهُنَّ ضَرَبًا غَيْرَ مُبَرِّحٍ. Over here, again, وَتَضْرِبُوهُنَّ ضَرَبًا غَيْرَ مُبَرِّحٍ. In the Quran, in Surah An-Nisa, there is one ayah, and this is considered to be the most controversial ayah in the Quran. Every single Orientalist, every single Westerner who studies the Quran, they say, oh, look at this. It says you can hit your woman. It says فَضْرِبُوهُنْ, that hit your woman. When you translate it, it says hit your women, but that's the incorrect translation. Understand that the Prophet ﷺ was a living commentary of the Quran. And over here the Prophet ﷺ makes it very clear. وَتَضْرِبُوهُنَّ ضَرْبًا غَيْرَ مُبَرِّحٍ, that you are allowed to strike your wife in a manner which will not bruise her, which will not harm her, which will not have any sort of consequences or repercussions on her. What kind of striking is that? That's a gentle pat. It's not punching her in her face. It's not taking a bat and smashing her. What's striking without leaving a mark? غَيْرَ مُبَرِّحٍ literally means without leaving a bruise, leaving any sort of mark, any sort of sign that anything was there. And if you read the books of tafsir, they make it very clear that what this is, it's a small pat. Hey, pay attention. Husband and wife do that to each other all the time. Hey, pay attention. Right? So don't misunderstand this ayah and go, do something incorrect. And, again, we have to be very, very frank in these kind of discussions. We have to speak about it. We can't say, our Muslim community is a very good community, nothing happens. Of course, a lot of things happen. And one of these things are domestic violence. Domestic violence happens all over America, and it happens in the Muslim community as well. Domestic violence is when husband or wife, they abuse one another physically. And it works both ways. Sometimes the husband abuses the wife physically, and at times the wife physically abuses the man. It works both ways. Statistics show that men are less likely to report cases where they have been abused by their wife. Because which man is going to call the cops and say, my wife is beating me up? Right? So men are less likely to report. But it happens. It's not that it doesn't happen, it happens. Domestic violence is an issue in this country. It's an issue. I'm not saying it's a prevalent issue within the Muslim community, but it exists in our community. And we should address these issues, not by invading into people's privacy, not by spying on other people, but we should take the right measures. We should take the right steps towards addressing these kind of things, because it's incorrect for a man to hit a woman. It's incorrect for a woman to hit a man, even if you're married to one another. And understand, if you're using any sort of text from the Quran, any sort of ayah from the Quran, you're incorrect. Right? You're incorrect in doing so. And then the Prophet ﷺ says, فَإِنِ انْتَهَيْنَا وَأَطَاعَكُنَّ فَعَلَيْكُمْ رِزْقُهُنَّ وَكِسْوَتُهُنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ. And if they listen to you, and if they respect you, and they obey you, then your responsibility, your obligation towards them is that you provide them with shelter, you provide them with food, with clothing, with whatever you're capable of doing so. That's the responsibility of the husband. That it's the responsibility of the husband to make sure that his family has proper accommodation, has proper food, proper clothing, to the best of his abilities. Right? A husband, you can't get married and then tell the wife that you have to do it and I'll stay home. If you agree, then that's no problem. But by default, it's the husband's responsibility. And then the Prophet ﷺ says, وَاسْتَوْسُوا بِالنِّسَاءِ خَيْرًا, that the Prophet ﷺ is now saying that I request you to treat your wives, your women, with love, khayra, with goodness. فَإِنَّهُنَّ عِنْدَكُمْ عَوَانْ لَا يَمْلُكْنَ لِأَنفُسِهِنَّ شَيْئًا. That understand that they are under your supervision. Understand that they are under your authority. So take care of them. Don't abuse your authority. Don't abuse them. وَإِنَّكُمْ إِنَّمَا أَخَذْتُمُوهُنَّ بِأَمَانَةِ اللَّهِ وَاسْتَحْلَلْتُمْ فُرُوجَهُنَّ بِكَلِمَةِ اللَّهِ فَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ فِي النِّسَاءِ وَاسْتَوْصُوا بِهِنَّ خَيْرًا. And then the Prophet again reminds us that understand that when we get married in the name of Allah. Right? That's the process. So the Prophet ﷺ is saying that understand, you took this woman as your wife with the trust of Allah, with the understanding that you will protect her. She is your trust. She is your, amana, it's a trust, something you protect. Your responsibility, you have to make sure you take care of that. And then the Prophet ﷺ is saying, again, فَاتَّقُوا اللَّهَ فِي النِّسَاءِ. Fear Allah in fulfilling your obligations towards your wives. Don't abuse them, don't mistreat them, don't malign them, And again, it works both ways. Same thing goes for the woman. It doesn't mean that, just because the Prophet is saying don't do this, then the women have the right to do that. No, it works both ways. But in general, the Prophet is specifically addressing men, because usually it's the men that, are considered to be the stronger gender. But the point is, dear brothers and sisters, marriage is a very delicate thing. It's a very delicate subject. And the Prophet ﷺ, the Quran has given us everything we need. And it's because of our ignorance, because of our lack of education, we feel that, we have nothing to look forward to. In fact, everything we need is in here. It's just we need to learn. And until we don't begin to learn and see what's in the Quran, what's in the life of the Prophet, then we're missing out. We're running around looking for solutions, trying to find what not. And it's right there under our noses. So may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to understand, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to have beautiful marriages, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to understand the life of the Prophet and the teachings of the Quran and implement them into our lives, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless us with beautiful families. Ameen. الحمد لله الذي أرسل رسوله بالهدى ودين الحق ليظهره على الدين كله وكفى بالله شهيدا ونشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له ونشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما اللهم صل على محمد عبدك ورسولك وصل على المؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات وبارك على محمد وأزواجه وذريته قال النبي عليه الصلاة والسلام أرحم أمتي بأمتي أبو بكر وأشدهم في أمن الله تعالى عمر وأصدقهم حياء عثمان وأقضاهم علي وفاطمة سيدة نساء أهل الجنة والحسن والحسين سيدة شباب أهل الجنة وحمزة أسد الله وأسد رسوله رضوان الله تعالى عليهم أجمعين. I'd like to conclude by just reminding everyone that one of the May 8th is Mother's Day. Now, we should take this as a reminder that our wives, they've given us our children, they've gone through a lot of hardship, and do something special for them. You don't have to do it exactly on Mother's Day. You don't have to celebrate the way other people are celebrating. I'm just saying, take this as a reminder to make your wife feel appreciated. Take this as a reminder to do something special for them. Because the basic psychology of men and women is that women always need to be shown affection. As men, we always have to continuously show our wives that we love them, we appreciate them. For men, it's not like that. For men, it's like, if you don't tell me you don't love me, I don't care, right? I know you love me. But for women, it's different. And this is the psychology of men and women. It's different. That's how Allah has created us. This is noted as a fact in psychology, in modern day psychology. So, we should go out of our way as husbands to let our wives know that we appreciate them, that, we thank them and we're grateful for everything they've done for us and our children. And also as our sisters, our wives, they should also learn to just, cooperate with the husbands so that both husband and wife can learn to cooperate and live together so that they can have a beautiful life as a married couple. Ameen.